Good evening. I'd like to call to order the August 13th, 2019 Issaquah City Council Services and Safety Committee. My name is Chris Ray. With me this evening are Councilmember Mariah Batiste and Councilmember Lindsay Walsh. We have one item on the agenda this evening. We are going to discuss Agenda Bill 7790, Mitigation and Impact Fees. This includes transportation, fire, police, bike and pedestrian, and general government buildings. This evening, Trish Heinonen is going to be presenting, and she brought an army of consultants with her. So, Trish, it's up to you.
Yes.
Take it away.
I'm going to turn it right over.
You want to get up there and turn it over to them.
Thank you very much. I'm John Ghilarducci with FCS Group. I'm just going to go through first part of our agenda, some background on system development. Oh, uh-oh. I'll speed through some background that I understand you've already had. What is an impact fee? And then touch on the statutory basis. And then Doug and Luke will walk you through the results of the individual impact and mitigation fee analyses. So what is an impact fee? Briefly, an impact fee is a one-time fee paid at the time of development by new development. It's intended to represent a proportionate share of the system facilities that will serve that new development and will serve growth. The impact fee law is in the Growth Management Act. That's embodied in RCW 8202. Among the many rules, and there are many rules in 8202, we have to provide and show that we're providing for a balance in funding between impact fees and other sources of funding, so we can't rely entirely on impact fees. The system improvements that we include in our impact fee calculation have to be reasonably related to the new development, can't exceed a proportionate share of the cost that will serve that development and benefit new development. In the case where a developer provides a facility on the list, we have to give them a credit against the impact fee for the construction of that improvement. There are rules about how we can spend the money. The money has to be collected and earmarked in special accounts. This is really important, that second bullet, expended only in conformance with the capital facilities plan element of the adopted comprehensive plan. You have 10 years to spend the money, or you can be required to pay it back. Police mitigation fee. Luke.
Thank you, John. So start off with, we're going to go through the police mitigation fee, which is not an impact fee, but does follow a very similar methodology, but it is not quite as constrained in terms of the legal requirements as an impact fee would be. So this fee was last updated in 2008. We're following the same methodology as the previous study. And the key takeaways is that there's less outstanding debt against the police portion of City Hall than the previous study. And the previous study, I believe, was about $6 or $7 million. Now it's only about $2.8 million. And that gets taken out of the cost bases, which means that it's higher now than it was previously. And in terms of the allocation of that cost to different types of land use, a higher percentage of calls for service in this version of the analysis were allocated to residential areas as opposed to previously, which means that the fee for single family and multifamily is going to increase more than the fee for, say, an office building. So as you can see here, we have both the existing fee and the proposed fee for single family, multifamily, which are by dwelling unit. And then for the office building fee and retail building, which are both by square foot. As you can see, the single family and multifamily fees both increasing by about 80 to 90% And for the office and retail, they're increasing by much smaller amounts. In terms of
Hold on just a sec.
Sorry.
So would you guys like to do questions after each fee, or do you want to save them to the end? Okay, all right. We'll save them to the end. Okay.
All right, fantastic. So second, we have the general government buildings mitigation fee, which is also mitigation, not impact fee, also updated in 2008 at the same time. Same methodology as the previous study. The fee is decreasing due to a change in the level of service over time. And the fees that we're showing have two options, one with a consolidated City Hall campus and one without. As you can see, the single-family residential fee, the existing one, is about $16.85, and our proposed two different versions of the fee are both substantially less. And that is because development in the city has gone at a much faster rate than the addition of new general government facilities. So the amount of general government facilities per development in the city has declined over that period of time.
Councilmember
do
Walsh?
have a question
Yeah, I
here.
knew you would.
The proposed without the new city hall, does that include the other things that we have considered to bring city facilities up to standard?
Yes, so the way that the fee works is kind of looking at what is the ratio of general government facilities to overall development in the city as of today. And then projecting into the future, how much would have to be added to match that, keep that level of service consistent. And then we check it against the future projects. So the maximum fee, as it were, is the $14.35. It doesn't matter how many projects there are in the future, it's not going to rise above that because that is the existing level of service standard. But if there are not enough projects included in future years to maintain that level of service standard, we adjust the fee downward because it doesn't make sense to collect a fee that you're going to have to refund a portion of.
And then on that idea, the decision between those two fees would be based on what's in the adopted comprehensive plan,
That's correct. That's correct.
All right, I have a follow-on. So in government building mitigation, is it general government buildings or is it general government mitigation?
General government buildings.
And it's denominated in square feet.
That's correct.
So when we did this last time, we had this number of dwelling units and we had this number of square feet. And we did a math problem and we came up with a number and that was our level of service. And now what we're saying in the 143560 number is that, taking that same number, that ratio of square feet to dwelling units and projecting it forward.
Not quite. So it's the same buildings that are going into the calculation. What we're looking at is calculating what the ratio is today versus what it was 10 years ago. So the ratio, I think previously it was about 0.004 square feet of general government buildings to general square footage of development within the city, and now it's about 0.0027. So the ratio has declined.
Okay, so are there fixed set of standard impact and mitigation fees that cities collect? I mean, is general government buildings a standard fee for cities to collect?
So your question really goes back to the difference between impact and mitigation fees. So there's 4 different types of impact fees. That's parks, fire, schools, and transportation. Okay? And those are very standard. Not all cities utilize them, but those are specifically outlined in the RCWs. Now, the mitigation fee is part of the SEPA process, which gives a lot more latitude to cities in terms of how they charge. So we are not aware of any other city, unless you guys found one, that charges a mitigation fee for general government buildings.
Okay, great, thanks. Councilmember Batiste?
So thank you. That was the question I had, was whether this was happening at sort of at the same rate in other cities, but it sounds like this is a little bit of a rare fee. So that answers that question. And just so to follow up a bit on the previous question, so I can understand, when we look at the proposed without the new city hall, we're taking into account really, I'm sorry, I think I do understand that you had asked the question. I'm asking it in a different way, but I think I have it. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Fantastic. Moving on to fire, which is an impact fee and thus constrained by RCW 8202. This was last updated in 2006, and the fee is increasing by a substantial amount. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is the projected cost of renovating Station 71 and expanding capacity to meet increased demand. And the other one is the adoption of the repayment of eligible Station 72 debt into the cost basis. So what we determined through the course of the study is that there's still a substantial amount of debt outstanding on Station 72, that if the study had been updated when Station 72 was constructed, could have been included as part of the future cost.
72 or 73?
I believe 72.
So it's the one down in the valley, not the one in the highlands? Just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Station 72.
Okay.
I'm not exactly
I'll
sure
believe
which
you.
one that is. Yeah, it'd be the newest one. Yeah. So anyway, if Station 72 had been included in the previous study, then you could have included it as a future project and the fees would have gone up accordingly.
Councilmember Walsh?
So with Station 71, one of the proposals that we've been given is potentially creating a temporary Station 71 and then a new Station 71 instead of renovating that building over there. Is that reflected as a potential?
Yes, that is what the projected cost
Okay.
of renovating and expanding means, is temporary and then a new one. Anyway, as I was saying, Station 72 could have been included previously, and so in consulting with the city attorney, we are proposing to adopt the debt associated, the capacity expanding portion of the debt associated with that station into the capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan as a future project, which would allow the city to use its current impact fee balance to pay that debt. And just one other point, the 13-year gap between studies, a lot of it associated with Station 72, as I've kind of outlined, has likely led to the city under-recovering from what it potentially could have. Once again, we've got the existing and the proposed. As you can see, for single family, it's going up by 256%, from $620 to $2,200. And for multifamily, increasing by a similar amount, and for office buildings as well. I'm going to turn it over to Doug.
So the traffic impact fee was last updated in 2015, and over that time, both the cost bases and the eligible growth, not the eligible growth, the planned growth, both declined a little bit. There's nothing magical about those numbers, but they are acting in tandem, and so you would expect there to be not much of a net change in the total impact fee, which is exactly what we get, is not much of a change. Also, there is some much better data now for person trips. Your existing methodology does use person trips to measure growth, but data has not always been as good as it is now, and it will continue to get better. It was not that long ago that the ITE manual did not have person trips, and now they do have person trips for selected land uses. And so we're just beginning to see how some land uses differ from each other in the number of person trips. And we're going to see an example of that in a minute. But there's better, more sophisticated data now. So the bottom line of all that is that if you were to take the increase we're proposing for the traffic impact fee and you were to annualize that back to 2015 when it was last done, you're looking at a 3.8% increase per year between 2015 and now. And all that is meant to show is that this is basically inflationary, basically an inflationary change. And you will, however, also see changes in fees by land use that are related to difference in person trips in the ITE manual. So here is the fee schedule for selected land uses. Single-family residences going up 16% to $9,173, but multifamily actually going down to $4,700. And got a question on this. We were prepared to come and answer some specific questions you had, and one of the questions was, is this difference solely related to the difference in person trips in the ITE manual? And the answer to that question is yes, it is. In the ITE manual, the person trips for a multifamily dwelling unit is about half of what it is for a single-family dwelling unit. And I could lead you through a little mental exercise to solidify the intuition behind that, and ask me if you want more discussion on that. But it is the person trips that is responsible for that change. Office building going up 8%, so you can see the general level is an increase. But for individual land uses where the person trips are different from where we thought they were last time, you will see starker differences. Does that make sense?
Can you explain the why multifamily person or trips is less?
So why? I can answer that at a couple different levels. One is because the ITE collected the data, and the data, that's what the data say. That's not a very satisfying answer, is it? So let me give you kind of the intuition. If we assume for a minute, and first of all, let's remember what a person trip is. A person trip is a human being arriving at or departing from a land use regardless of mode of travel. So a person in a car by themselves is one person trip. Two people in a car is two person trips. Three brothers and sisters leaving by bike, that's three person trips. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So if we make some simplifying assumptions about single-family residences and multifamily residences, let's say that all trips are by vehicle just to be simple. And the number of person trips for multifamily is roughly half of what it is for single-family, which it is. Then the intuition is when the car is leaving, it's on average half as full in the apartment as it is in the single-family dwelling. And that seems intuitively right, doesn't it? I mean, in single-family residences, you will tend to have larger families. In multifamily, there might be a greater preponderance of people living by themselves. So that makes sense. But that's, obviously the data don't go to that level. I'm rationalizing the data that was collected by the ITE.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It's just interesting because the school district did a similar thinking of more students in single family than multifamily. And I think as they looked at the data in more detail, they found that that wasn't actually empirically the case.
Well, that's interesting because the data source for the ITE is a national source. They collect, well, let me put a caveat on that. It is potentially national, but the data come from wherever the studies happen to be done. For some land uses, all of the studies may be done in Florida, for example. I've seen that. But we have seen in localized, when we have reason to use census data, we have found things in local communities that are quite contrary to the national trend. Mm-hmm. I was doing a park impact fee in a small town in Oregon where multifamily occupancy was higher than single-family occupancy. I haven't seen that any other place except this one little town. That's an example. So what you're saying may indeed be true, but the ITE would not be sensitive to that. Okay. So just so you know, there is no legal reason that you are bound to the ITE manual. If you have better data that you can stand behind, then you're not legally obligated to stick with the trip counts in the ITE manual. And we have, for certain clients, I know schools is one where we had a really good traffic engineer partnering with us that gave us good trip counts for the local schools that would have been quite different from what is in the ITE manual. And if it's more local, it's more defensible. So I would not hesitate to use more local data.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it? Okay, so the main point on the traffic impact fee is it ain't much of a change. There's no strategic change going on. However, we don't see that with the bike and ped mitigation fee, also last updated in 2015, but important large changes. The eligible costs are up 40%, even though the growth is a smaller denominator than in the previous study. Also, the trip end thing still applies because trip ends are for both cars and bikes and pedestrians, so that still applies here as well. But it's very clear that there is a bigger strategic priority to include bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And so if we were to take the change that we're proposing in the bike ped mitigation fee and annualize that as we did for the traffic impact fee, you're looking at 15.4% per year, which in no way could be considered inflationary. This reflects a change in priorities. And so you have a single family fee going from $765 up to $1,357. And you'll see the same phenomenon in the split between single family and multifamily, with the office building being somewhere in between. Same person trip phenomenon going on there. That's traffic and bike ped, and I will have more questions to answer in a moment.
I'm just going to walk you through kind of what this means to a developer, to any individual property that might be developed. So for single family, as you can see, some of the fees are going up, some are going down. But the key takeaway is that the overall level across all five fees, the moment is right about $11,000. We're proposing to raise it to about $14,400. That's an increase of $3,300. Multifamily, it's a pretty similar story. Obviously, the fees are a little bit lower in aggregate, although not all of them. And then for office buildings, the increase is there as well, but it's also significantly smaller because, as I discussed a little bit on the police fee, the percentage of calls for service, the kind of various measures that we use to distribute the cost bases, the residential land uses have increased faster than commercial. Also, just wanted to touch on something because I know it's a really key point in a lot of communities that we talk to, is oftentimes you'll hear concerns about housing affordability and how they relate to impact fees. So I just want to add a couple key points, is that they are a vital part of funding new infrastructure. I mean, fundamentally what impact or mitigation fees are is the buy-in to the city's existing systems for new development. So if the fees don't increase as a reasonable share of the total system, someone has got to pick that up, and it usually ends up being the city's existing residents. Now, they do increase the cost of new housing. Obviously, the fees are going up. That makes a new house or a new apartment more expensive. But compared to the total construction cost of those units, it's a pretty small amount. And we believe that it's unlikely to have a significant impact on the new construction of new development. I think Doug had a couple more questions he wanted to answer.
Some I want to ask. Just kidding. Yeah, we did get some questions, and we weren't able to incorporate them in the slides, but we do have some answers to share with you, and I want to be sure to do that. One of the questions that we got was how much money has been left on the table for not doing this sooner? And an exact number is quite elusive, but let me give you kind of an algorithm for thinking about it. So this is a summary for single-family residents for all of the fees that we're talking about here. Notice that...
Hey, Doug, close to the mic, so you're on TV. They want to hear you.
Hey. I can. Yeah, but I'm a weatherman, you know. Okay. So you'll notice that the total increase is about $3,300. And so if you want to know what's been left on the table, multiply that by the number of single-family or single-family equivalent dwelling units that were developed in whatever span of time you're thinking of, whether that goes back to 2015 or earlier. But you wouldn't want to do it earlier for certain fees like the traffic and bike ped. Big caveat here. You really cannot be certain that the fees could be raised to this level X number of years ago. So whatever result you get from using this algorithm is really the upper limit of what the real number is, because the real number is likely to be less. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, you notice I'm not giving you an exact number, because an exact number would require research into what actually got developed. We can do that. That's just a little outside of the scope of what we're currently up to. But that will get you much of the way there. Another question that we got, and I'm so glad to be able to address this, somebody is thinking in terms of optimizing the amount of time between updating. What is the optimal amount of time when you're thinking of cost and benefit? What is the right amount of time to go between these updates? And the answer is, it really doesn't have anything to do with a fixed amount of time. It has to do with how often does the cost basis change. So most of the impact fees are based upon projects. And so how often does your project list change? And if it changes fairly dramatically, especially if it goes up, that is definitely a time you want to revisit your impact fees. But if you go 4, 5, 6 years without changing your project list in any appreciable way, there may not be too much bang for the buck to revisit your impact fees. So the point of the answer is, it's not about time, it's about, has something changed? Does that make sense? Final question I prepared in advance. Someone asked us, and I thought we were about to go here a minute ago, about software. And does that fit in the general government? So let me give you a very qualified yes. In the sense that the general government buildings fee is a mitigation fee. Mitigation fees are not subject to a lot of the restrictions and the specific lists of categories as the impact fees. Now, currently, your general government mitigation fee is a building-related fee. Well, software is not a building. But there's nothing in statute that says your general government fee has to be a mitigation fee. You do want these fees to be based on and spent on capital projects. But there are software projects that are in CIPs. Mm-hmm. So if you were willing to do your general government fee in a different way than it currently is, it would be feasible to include something like software or other thing that you capitalize for general government purposes. It would be possible to include that in your mitigation fee. Did that was a squirrely answer. Does that scratch you where you itch on that?
That was my itch and it scratched it just fine, thanks.
Okay. That is it as far as the questions we know about, and now it's time for you to hit us with the stuff we weren't expecting.
Councilmember Walsh, I think you've got some,
I've got the list.
okay. Take it away.
I'm scared.
So I'm concerned about the fire impact fee, because as I read it, looking at any station creation, the calculation, rather than being, person trips or something like that, is based on the cost per parking space within a fire station. That seems very odd to me. And then looking at it, the 3 stations that were used as examples, because they're so different in age, had a huge difference in their cost per parking space. So primarily what I want to make sure is that the calculation of the cost include like the needed expansion and aren't just based on older stations?
Yes, so we didn't go into the exact components of how the fee is constructed. I can tell you that about 90% of the fire impact fee across all land use categories comes from the future stations rather than the existing cost basis. And the reason for that is, as you said, a lot of the stations are quite old. They just don't cost what the city invested in them originally, just kind of pales in comparison to what the city's going to have to invest in the future.
So in looking at the cost per parking space that's calculated, it's based off of our CIP's version of, hey, this is what the station is going to cost, and...
So there's 2 components. There's the existing facilities component, which is basically, okay, what does the city own right now? And how much of that is still available and eligible to be reimbursed in the impact fee? And that's based on all the city's existing apparatus, existing stations. And that was about 10%, so a couple $100 for a single family home. And then there's the future cost component, which is based on the CIP, the new station as well. And that is, how much of the city's CIP is going to serve new growth rather than existing city development. And that was the vast majority of it.
Okay, and it uses the cost per parking space because that's the established, we have a certain number of parking spaces in our existing stations that equate to a certain number of single-family units, for example? Is that right?
In a way. So we used parking space as a substitute for bays after talking with staff from each side. Fire and Rescue felt that a parking space was more representative because there's certain fire trucks that take up 2 parking spaces, but which would be both sides of the station bay, as it were, whereas, you can fit 2 ambulances in there. So we developed it as a representative metric of how many apparatus each station can fit, and then looked at how many apparatus are needed to serve the current, or kind of how many people or units of development each apparatus could reasonably serve. And then we looked at, well, once we have this, amount of development that each apparatus can serve, how much existing capacity is left in the city's current inventory of apparatus that aren't being used?
Utilized to their full, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Trish asked me to clarify that when we talk about parking spaces, we're talking about where the apparatus can sit. We're not talking about the firefighters' parking space in the parking lot, just to be clear on that. Okay.
Yep. Okay, let me go Next stuff. So one of the questions that we were looking at considering was whether or not we would want to indicate to the community that the existing general government level of service is no longer the city goal. I'm trying to understand this concept because one of my concerns in looking at this is our need for general government buildings is increasing with what we've put on the CIP, and yet the assessed fee is decreasing because basically we've utilized all of our current buildings and we have other needs. But I'm trying to understand this sense of establishing a level of service for general government buildings and then saying that our adopted one should be lower. Can you talk me through that?
I don't suppose someone could raise this. Oh, yeah, you can talk about it.
That was raised as one of the options when the analysis came out that we sort of had a deficiency in keeping up with it, is to ask the question, is there a deficiency because we truly believe that we don't need those anymore? Or is it just that we're having troubles keeping up and we still want to leave the goal, the level of service where it is, but we know it's just going to take some time to get there? And the administration chose the second one. We think that we still do need those, the government buildings or services if we choose to go that way with software. We still believe we need that, and that it's just going to take us a while to build that, that inventory back up to what it used to be.
And so what's the impact for us in each of the scenarios? So if we were to say our adopted level of service should be reduced because maybe we were overstaffed and we're coming back to a normal, does that mean then that we couldn't use the fee toward reaching a higher level of service, or?
No, that would only mean that when it comes time to amend the capital facilities element in the comprehensive plan, where there's a discussion on level of service and the rate studies, we would just have a different discussion there. It wouldn't necessarily change the fees as they're being analyzed today. It would just mean that the end point would just be different. You would choose to lower it in the future.
Okay, so that wouldn't even affect the fees that we're looking at this time. It would be for
Correct.
a future time.
It's a policy question.
Okay.
And while I'm up here, I believe you had a current question, question on general government. You said, is the fee without the city hall including the improvements to the buildings? And I believe the answer is no, because those improvements would be considered maintenance. Is that right?
They wouldn't be included in any scenario.
Right. And the other comment is we gave you two options because those were the two that we had originally given you in that work session. But the ordinance that's attached to your agenda bill, the administration is recommending that you pick the general government buildings option with the new consolidated city hall.
And that's because it matches what we're adopting with the CIP, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So I would turn it back to the experts.
Is everyone clear on what those two scenarios represent? It's a problem of stranded money and trying to avoid stranded money, and I want to make sure folks understand. Okay.
That's what I've got.
Okay, you good? Mm-hmm. Any questions for you?
Councilmember Walsh is doing a really good job.
Always.
Asking a lot of wonderful questions. I guess for me, I'm just not sure if I have this straight. In terms of what we would be looking at for adopting the changes and looking at a 3-year period that we would go back and review after a 3-year period. Is that correct?
When we adopted the transportation and park fee update and the new bike ped mitigation in 2015, you all put a clause in the code that said that the fees, rate studies will be updated every 3 years. And those are the only fees that have that requirement, if you will, to do it that often. And seeing how with fire and police, it took us a while to get it funded, to fund the rate studies, we thought it would be a good idea to put that requirement in for all the fees, just so that we didn't get behind on them again like we have in the past. So that was our attempt to try to make it easier for us to get those in the budget, the rate study updates.
So with, that was sort of the crux of the question, is that if we would have had that in place earlier than what we saw with fire and that debt that we were looking at, we probably would have dealt with that earlier.
Right, I believe it would have helped us put that in the budget if it was a code requirement, I think. I mean, not that I'm in charge of that, but I think it would have helped us make the case that it's a code requirement to update the fees.
Councilmember Walsh?
So on that line, so there's saying that we're going to do something and putting a policy in place that it's going to get done, and then there's actually
The budget.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so what is the barrier? And it sounds like in your email to me earlier, the barrier has been getting it budgeted.
Correct.
And so it would be really, like, if we could do that calculation on the missing revenue that we missed out by not updating this, and then be able to use that to justify the cost in our budget, I think that would be helpful in getting all of the council members on board, even if it's a loose calculation.
Right.
That concept of, here's the money you lost and didn't make growth pay for their growth.
Right.
And if you had just, approved the $110,000 that it cost to have the consultants look at these fees,
Right.
you'd be good.
And the other way to look at that, because we don't, as Doug so clearly said, it's hard to anticipate or even to guess how much money is left on the table, is we think of the rate studies as an investment.
Yes.
You're making investment that's going to provide more dividends because you're able to actually not subsidize the development with city funds. You're able to use the impact fees and mitigation fees to their fullest extent. So we think of it as an investment in that, is another way to help your council members understand that it seems like a lot of money, but when you look at through the years at what we didn't get, it would have been a good investment back then.
So continuing on that line, who is the person on staff who is responsible for bringing up the idea that this needs to be in the budget so that we don't lose that in the future?
It comes from all of us. Is my boss watching? It comes, from the departments, and then the administration shares it with you all, and then, you go through the backbreaking negotiations of what goes in and what comes out. So I think it's up to all of us to keep track of when are they coming up due and when, and how to best to fund it. And if it's that you do, we kind of were hit with all of them at once because it finally got to a tipping point that it was like, oh my gosh, fire is so old, we need to do those. So I think now that we realize how low we can get, I think we're going to be more on a timetable, if you will, and maybe we start doing 3 1 year and 3 the next year, so it's not a big hit in 1 year, but somehow to help you all budget it less painfully and yet still keeping up with the cost of our services and our fees.
And maybe I can ask that slightly a different way. Is it the fault of the, has this been proposed regularly?
Nobody's fault.
No, I want to lay blame where it.
That was my job. As you remember,
Has it been proposed?
In PPC proposed that it might be time to spend the money to update the fees. So it's come internally, it's come externally, and it's all of our responsibilities.
I just want to make sure this doesn't happen in the future.
Right. I'm
So
with
I
you
am
there.
willing to take the blame if it's the problem that staff has proposed it at the requisite times and council hasn't funded it. I think we should recognize that. If the problem is staff got a little bit behind because you've got a lot on your plates and it didn't come up at the regular schedule, then I want to make sure we're looking at that in the future and make sure that it's coming up. And I think staggering it is a good way to do that, but also making sure somebody is responsible for making sure it's in the budget.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Okay.
So I just have a couple of, you can stay there, because I think some of them, you might get some. Are we doing any indexing now? I know that one of the
Yes,
things
yes, we are.
Okay,
For all
so
of them.
when we look at the changes in fees, pick one, fire, so that went up substantially, but when we were indexing it along, so it was actually a bigger jump than that?
When we index each January, by code, each of the fees is indexed to a different index, if you will. Some of them are building indexes, some of them are construction indexes, and because I'm not as genius as these guys, I don't remember which one is indexed to which one, but each of them has an index that relates more directly to what it is, fire is which one, and it's usually a small percentage of the annual index that it gets multiplied by, and then in January, we publish our new fees, and it's almost like an inflation number, that they all go up just a itty bitty bit, that's supposed to take us from the 3 years to just have little gentle increases so it's not a big hit when we do the rate study. But obviously, fire was done so long ago that even the incremental didn't stop the hit from not doing it for, 13 years.
So on the traffic, which went up 3.8% annually, so that should have been tracking pretty close then.
Right.
So that shouldn't have, and I guess that's what we saw.
Right, and
So-
that one was done in 2015, too,
Yeah,
so that
so it was even a
fairly
shorter
recent,
window.
right.
Okay.
That was a good one.
And then when we collect mitigation or impact fees, and we're going to use those for capital investments, is there, how much of the impact fee can we use to offset the cost of the investment? Can we just use simply the impact money that's in the impact fee for our mitigation fund to pay for something, or does it have to be X percentage?
I think this is your guess.
So a couple things is, first of all, you can only spend them on projects that are listed in the capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan. In addition, the RCW states that impact fees cannot be the sole source of funding for projects, but it doesn't give any more specific number than that. So there's no 50%, 70% requirement.
As long as it's not 100%.
Yeah.
And then what about with mitigation fees?
So mitigation fees, constitutionally, they kind of have the same constraints about equal protection, but there's no RCW that specifically limits them to a specific number either. I guess my general recommendation would be that you shouldn't plan on funding any project 100% with impact or mitigation fees.
I'm going to throw in an additional restriction. If in your, for example, in your traffic and bike ped report, you will see a table that shows all of the projects, all the project costs, and then a percentage that each one, you are further restricted by that percentage. So that if you have, let's take an example here. You have a $50 million project, but only 2.5 million is considered eligible, then don't spend more than 2.5 million from impact fees.
Okay, right.
Just to
Councilmember Walsh?
clarify, based on my understanding, that 2.5 million in that case is because that's the portion of the project that's attributable to growth versus
exactly
deficiency.
Right. That's
Okay.
exactly right.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. That was helpful and informative, and I appreciate the job you did on getting back to us with some questions. We have a couple of questions in front of us. I'm going to do them one at a time, if that's okay with the committee. because I think they're all kind of discrete. I think we might find ourselves kind of aligned. But so the first question is adding the update to the rate study every 3 years for fire impact fees and police and general government building mitigation fees. Any discussion on that topic? Deputy President Batiste.
Well, I think that was one of the questions that I asked. I would hate to see us get behind, especially as we were with fire. So I think that if we feel like this is the right amount, and we certainly don't want to wait beyond that, I think that that's really important to add.
Councilmember Walsh?
I agree in general, but thinking to the point of updating something is if there are new projects on the list. And if we feel like something like fire stations might not have new projects coming up every 3 years, I would be hesitant to commit ourselves to having to spend the money in order to agree with the ordinance if there weren't going to be new projects. So I'm not sure how that would be handled. Obviously, council has the ability to say yay or nay whether or not something is funded in the budget. So I like the concept. I just don't want to be committed to spending money on something if it is not necessary because there are not new projects.
Can I ask a question I should have asked the first time? How much does it cost us to do an impact or a mitigation study in rough dollars? Look it up.
Lindsay, that was one of Lindsay's questions, and what was the total for all of these this time, even with parks?
So you had said the contract totals for transportation and park impact fee was not to exceed $48,370. Oh, and the ped bike, so transportation, park, ped bike, and then the fire impact and police and general government mitigation fees were not to exceed $110,000. And so that didn't include cost of staff time, and you didn't specify how many hours of that they had spent, but rough idea,
Right, and,
$160,000.
my time, I'm just here for you, so that my time doesn't matter. But generally, would be the smaller number if we kept up with the study, but the bigger number for fire and police were because we hadn't done them in a while. I believe that's how those broke down.
Because in all cases, we were updating a methodology that another consultant had done. If we were updating our own work every 3 years, it would be less than that. So I think you could consider that the most that these updates would cost every 3 years, if that helps.
Deputy President Batiste, question?
So not a question, just a comment, so go ahead.
I have one more question, which and it's more of a clarification on what Trish just said. So if we do something every 3 years, the cost is less than if we do it every 10 years?
Yes.
Is it significantly less? It sounded like it from those numbers that it was about half.
I better just leave it at significantly less and not give you a half without,
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to get a sense of kind of what the effect of the delay is, not only in terms of foregone revenue, but also in terms of additional cost to do the catch-up.
So using these numbers, which are just one example, the $110,000 for the fire impact and police and general government at a cost per year would be like $10,000 per year. Whereas transportation and park and ped bike at $48,000, I think those were updated 3 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. So about $12,000 to $15,000 a year. So it works out to be about the same cost per year. It's just when you put it in the budget.
Yeah. Deputy President Batiste.
So I don't know what would stop us from maybe something in between, that if we had this, that we would review it every 3 years. What could come forward would be information about what projects had or had not been added, and then the cost associated with going forward. But at least putting this in front of council every 3 years, if council decides there have been no significant projects and we don't need to go forward with this at this time, but at least I think that that would stop what potentially happened with fire.
And I am inclined to go with the 3 years, and it also brings us in line with the other mitigation impact fees, correct? That we did take this action on with them.
Right.
So it just aligns everything, and yes, we might not need it, but if we don't need it because we haven't made any significant changes to the plan, I suspect it'll be a minimal amount of effort to also update the
Right. Could be. And
the
Sheldon,
impact mitigation fees.
excuse me, Sheldon brought up a great comment with transportation impact fees. We first have to update the model. And so there's a cost for Torsten to update the model before that information can go into the project list and those pieces. So that's not in your, in the numbers, because that's not a cost that we paid, but it was certainly a cost that Sheldon paid for the concurrency update. And I'm not sure how much that it usually is that 100,000 or? I recall it was a big number.
The work that Torsten did for us for this, in preparation for FCSG to do the impact fee analysis, was around $100,000 to update the concurrency model.
Right. But we should be doing that anyway.
We're doing that anyway, but when it's a total cost.
Right.
Right? So it's part and parcel to the update of the impact fees because it's integral to it.
Thanks, Sheldon. Councilmember Walsh.
How often do we update the CIP? Every 2 years?
Every 2 years.
So might it make sense to have the rate studies happen every 4 years so that they're, well, I guess you could do it in between CIPs. Okay.
Yeah, and I
Just
think if we
thinking through.
do it kind of at a staggered way, it's going to, some will be the year of the CIP, some will be the year of the cat, some will be the year of the donkey.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's late. Or the pig. Okay. Anyway, so any other thoughts on the first question, which is whether or not we should update the impact fees for police, general government, fire, and those three, every 3 years? Any thoughts?
I agree that we
All
should.
right. All in favor of recommending that? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
So that point one, we're all in agreement on. Point two, which is to continue the annual adjustments of fees previously established based on specific national indexes. Deputy President Batiste.
So I agree that we should use that information, but based on our conversation, it sounded like there might be some local data that we also could have as a data point. So having an option to have that as another data point, I was wondering if that could be incorporated.
Doug.
Are we referring to indexing?
Oh, no.
Yeah, this is around indexing,
I'm sorry.
not
I was
trip counts.
thinking about something else. So please move forward. I was on a different thought process.
Different page, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Walsh?
I agree with the idea of annual adjustments.
Yeah, it seems to me that the annual adjustments provided a nice stopgap in between, and they are a low-cost item for us to implement, as it's simply looking up the index and doing the math problem. Does that require an update to ordinance, or is the ordinance would just say that we're indexing? Okay, all right.
Indexing, yes.
All right, indexing.
Now I'm on the right page.
All right. Okay, let's talk about our level of support for that. All in favor of recommending continuing the annual adjustments to fees previously established based on specific national indexes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we are unanimous on that point also. And then finally is to adopt the fee updates based on the reports technical data for fire and traffic impact fees, police bike ped mitigation fees, and mitigation fees for general government buildings that includes the new municipal facility. Comments, thoughts, deliberations?
Since those are two separate bullet points, should we?
There's actually three.
Yeah,
Would you like to take them one at a time?
pull those apart.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about accepting the updated based on the report's technical data analysis for fire. We should just do them individually. For fire impact fees. Thoughts on fire impact fees?
Yes, I would say
Yeah,
yes.
I think we're well overdue. I think we have a significant need for fire facilities, and this will go towards helping make that. So we're all supportive of fire. Traffic impact fees.
Yes.
Yes, I think we're all in agreement on fire. Police?
Yes.
Yes, all in agreement on police. Bike pedestrian mitigation fee.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're all, you there with us, Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, I mean, it's a larger increase, and I would like to track the trend of that over time, because I think it suggests that we're moving in a direction of having many more of those projects on our CIP, and a lower, what would you call it, basically not return on investment, but basically use of that, which is why the fee went up so much. So I'm a bit leery if that trend continues, but I'm all for it for this period.
I think from my perspective, the bike pedestrian impact fee increase being substantial like that more reflects our strategic direction of multimodal transportation than it does about anything else. I think that's a reflection of our policy decisions and where we are putting our investments. And so it seems to me like a reasonable recovery moving forward. So we good with those? All right, and then the final one is the mitigation fee for general government buildings that includes the new municipal facility. So any discussion on that one?
Yes.
I think well, I see nods. I'm going to say we're all in favor of putting in the new rate for the general government building that includes the new municipal facility. So in summary, I think, Councilmember Walsh.
What would we have to do to look at adding software or other municipal capital needs into that?
You would want to redo the study for that particular fee. So that it would have to be done in a different way. And I don't guarantee what the result would be, except that you could include those things.
Okay, so then let me ask that potentially a different way. We're looking at perhaps making a large investment in financial software for the city. If we do so and don't include that in the fee now, but do in 3 years' time if we review this, I assume some of that cost for that financial software would be attributable to growth, and so could...
If you've already made the investment, it is conceivable that a portion of that, there could be some partition attributing part of it to existing user or existing residents and a portion to future residents. So yes, that is potentially the case. I'm hand waving on this because the whole general government mitigation fee would have to be done in a different way than it currently is, which is very building and square footage focused. And so I'm not able to envision what the output of that is. I'm telling you that it is possible to include the kind of project you're describing. I just have no idea what the numbers would turn out to be.
And so we're already, I'll call it in the positive term, ahead of the curve in assuming a general government buildings mitigation fee. And this, considering software or other non-building capital projects, would put us even farther into that maybe concerning realm, or a realm of there is no precedence.
Oh, I'm not worried about that so much. I mean, we could, if we were to do it, we would do it in a way that is defensible. It sounds like you're worried about legal risk. And that's not the concern that I'm expressing. I'm expressing finding a coherent methodology that could incorporate elements of buildings and software which would look different than what we've currently done. And so we would want to make it coherent so that it is defensible. But I'm confident that if you can call something a capital project, either in the future or in the past, there is a way of looking at mitigation fees to at least include that category of asset.
Okay, and so on that idea of future versus past, if we don't incorporate that in this fee now, and we make the investment in the financial software, are we experiencing a loss by not having that in the fee, in the mitigation fee, versus in the future?
Impossible to say, because
Okay.
it's not additive. It's not like you have your current mitigation fee and then your software project or some percentage of it would just be a layer on top of it. We would not be able to do it that way. It would have to be a completely recalculated fee. And it's conceivable that once you did all that recalculation, that you end up with a fee that includes a portion of the software project, but overall is lower than what we have calculated now. Well, that doesn't do you a lot of good.
Because if we're not keeping up equivalent to growth with our software level of service, then the amount that we would be able to bring in. Okay.
So I think that we're a little bit off topic, and since it was my question that took us off topic, I'm happy to go there. But this mitigation fee that we're discussing tonight is for buildings, and it was designed for buildings, and it's only buildings. So I think that that's what we have to address. I would like to have a discussion with the administration and with council about maybe looking at a different way going forward and incorporating in a broader definition of what government services might be.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to miss out on a huge opportunity considering the potential investment going forward.
I think we'll have lots of opportunities. All right, so to summarize, I think we are recommending to the council to add the requirement for updating rate studies every 3 years for impact fees, for fire impact fees, police and general government building mitigation fees. We are recommending to the council to continue the annual adjustments of fees previously based on specific national indexes. And 3, we are recommending to the full council adopting the fee updates based on the technical data analysis for fire and traffic impact fees, police, bike, and pedestrian mitigation fees, and a mitigation fee for general government buildings that includes the new municipal facilities. All right. Any other comments or thoughts? Councilmember Walsh.
I noticed Parks is not included on here. It was updated in 2015.
I'm glad you asked about Parks. Parks is coming to you in November.
Because the Parks Strategic Plan
Had a
happened?
big list of projects that we wanted to be sure were in this round of impact fees.
Okay, so that's being
So that's
established at
taking- yeah,
another
that's-
conversation.
That's going on right now as we speak.
Hey, Trish, while you're there, when do we have this scheduled to come back to council for action?
For this one? Thank you, September 16th.
Okay. Regular business? Yes. Okay, so we will send that back to council September 16th. I think it needs to be regular business. Regular business, September 16th.
So
Trish?
does that need a presentation in the new way for regular business? Does, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I would think so.
Still learning the new way with that.
Yeah, we're all learning the new way.
We are.
So Doug and Luke and John, thank you for joining us. Sheldon, thank you for being here. Trish, always awesome to have you. So as many know here and in TV land, the Issaquah City Council has adopted new rules of procedure, and we will be disbanding our committee structure. So this will be the last Services and Safety Committee meeting. So I want to first and foremost thank Councilmember Walsh and Council Deputy President Batiste for putting up with me this year. It has been such a great time. But mostly I want to thank Chief Scott Beerbaum for being our liaison, and mostly I want to thank Teresa Scott for being the most awesome coordinator of this committee and providing us with little gifts every time we show up. So thank you so much for everything that you guys do for us. Trish, thanks for being here. And with that, I think we are adjourned.